40,000 residents in just an hour from Cleveland, you'd think it would be the perfect blend of small town feel and big city amenities. But it isn't. In June of 2003, a videotape surfaced of Warren resident Lyndall Kimball being beaten by 3 white police officers. These police officers were at least 200 pounds each. Kimball was choked, slammed against the pavement, kicked, punched, and even gored multiple times with a metal object, all in front of his family, children, and neighbors. At the time, officers claimed that Kimball, who had been pulled over for failing to use his turn signal, had stuffed crack cocaine into his mouth, and they were only trying to save him. But the video showed that this incident was about a lot more than a minor drug violation. It painted a picture that many have always seen in pinpoint focus, while others have struggled to see it clearly. The law is above the law. The city of Warren is just one example of how small towns across America have been allowed to fly their brutality under the radar. In the book Blue Mafia, writer Tim Tolka investigates the town of Warren as well as Steubenville, Ohio, and a civil rights attorney who took on small-town corruption. Joining us now to discuss his book Blue Mafia is writer, editor, and researcher Tim Tolka. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
Tim, I want to start, in your book you quote an unnamed resident of Warren, Ohio, who told a local journalist there, to the one who thinks, you said, quote, to the one who thinks Warren was better off when the mob ran it, consider this: what if the mob still runs the town? It's an interesting statement. Can you tell us a little bit about Warren, the Kimball incident, and what led it to being a place with such a dark and questionable history with the police?
Well, Warren is like many other small towns in America. It's unchanging. There's a concentration of power, and the police were not questioned. And my investigation showed that these problems went back decades and that the black community had been talking about them for ages, but nobody would listen. And it took an outsider as well as a viral video to bring attention to this small town. But what I learned was that there are many towns just like Warren whose problems have been swept under the rug.
Wow, so it's not like Mayberry anymore, is, thinking back to, like, what we've all been told about small town America.
Interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, about Warren and Steubenville and how they differed in terms, because there were 2 incidents. I talked about the Kimball incident in Warren, which was it made national headlines, actually. CNN ran the video, viral in the day before being viral was a thing. And Steubenville, obviously, is a different case than what most people know Steubenville for. Sadly, we have to parse out which Steubenville case it is, but how they differed. One of the things in your book that I thought was really interesting was your take on how the press handled things differently in each of those situations. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that has such a big impact on what eventually has happened with the Department of Justice and everything else there?
Absolutely. So Steubenville did not have a free press. There's a local paper there called the Herald-Star, and basically they close their eyes to everything and they do not believe local residents when they complain. This was back in the 90s that Steubenville had its most serious problems. So before viral videos, and before there was much press attention on the problem of police brutality. What was different about Warren is that they had very active journalists. There were at least 3 that were pretty focused on the police issues. And they also had about 10 years or 15 years on Steubenville, so that there were handheld camcorders. And once one resident got one of those in his hands, they blew up the police brutality problem there so that everybody in the nation saw it. But there are many towns just like Warren and just like Steubenville. I'm from a little town in the Midwest where it's still effectively segregated. No black families have been able to move into this town. It's called Salem, Illinois. Near Warren, the former headquarters of the KKK is in Niles. And the way I see it, this was a kind of periodic racial animus that comes up through the surface, but most of the time it's just below the surface, kind of simmering. And when Lyndall Kimball was videotaped in his situation with the Warren police, those floodgates and all that anger came into the public very quickly.
It's interesting when you mentioned the thing with the Steubenville newspaper, and I just quickly, what do you think, what do you believe leads to that kind of where a local newspaper suddenly no longer believes local residents. What makes that happen? Why do you believe? Why is that happening?
Well, it's a couple of things. There was a very, very vocal police chief that was in charge of the police department. He would threaten anybody who criticized the police, and the prosecutor was the same way. He would charge anybody who made any kind of misconduct allegation with making false claims. And so there was a atmosphere of great fear in the town, and nobody wanted to go against the police chief or the prosecutor because of their awesome power to silence people. And in Warren, even though they had kind of similarly vocal and aggressive police chiefs and prosecutor, the threats didn't have the same effect because the media was actually asking the residents to tell their stories, whereas in Steubenville, everybody just was afraid and the journalists didn't want to ask any questions.
Wow. Ohio State has had many federal police misconduct investigations. They've had as many as New York, and then are the only state. In fact, the only state with more is California, which I think many people would not expect. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a much larger population.
Now, you talk about civil rights attorney Richard Oliveto in your book. How was he able to shine a light on the misconduct, and what effect did it have on his life?
Well, the short answer is it ruined everything for him. It gave him a purpose, and it brought him into the media, which also made him a target. At first, in Steubenville, the local police retaliated, and they tried to blow up his apartment. They tried to shoot him in his house. They tried to silence him with threats. They broke into his house numerous times and urinated on the carpet and put his wife's underwear out on the lawn. They did everything to keep him quiet, but he just kept working harder. In Warren, the police didn't retaliate, the judges did. And so the judges accused him of being crazy, then they accused him of cheating his clients, and then eventually the Supreme Court came after him with completely false, fabricated allegations, and eventually took away his license to practice law.
Wow.
And it seems like there's not much of a change in Ohio even today. Just last week, the Ohio House of Representatives passed a new Stand Your Ground bill that sort of shifts the burden of proof for self-defense cases. And one of the things it does many other things, but one of them is self-defense cases to the prosecution, and removes the sort of duty to retreat, like to try to get away before you kill somebody. State Representative David Leveland said it is a stand your ground on steroids. This shoot first, ask questions later bill is a solution looking for a problem.
Oh, man.
This new bill also, there's, the idea, they took away the need for a conceal and carry permit holder to have ID on him while he's carrying a gun. I feel like that's going to be an African American who's going to end up getting shot or arrested, because we know they don't hold these gun laws in the same regard for whether it's a Caucasian person or an African American, any person of color. We've seen that. So my question is Ohio clearly hasn't learned from its mistakes. And where does this come from? Like, where is this, it just seems like they're purposely doing things to drive people out. And you say it's sort of self-segregated. Is this just legislative and economic and sort of the state trying to literally push people out?
That's a really good question. It's something that I pondered, because Ohio and Pennsylvania they lead the nation in racially charged Google searches. So if you look into the data, you find that there's a lot of racist sentiment, and it goes back a long time. Even though Ohio was a hotbed for abolitionism, it was also a very, very serious Jim Crow state. There are many towns that had signs threatening black people that they shouldn't let the sun set over their head. I was born in a town like that, so I know very much how those towns are. They're very violent, and they put the responsibility on the victim to make justice happen. And it's the same way with police. Police are not supposed to be questioned. White people are not supposed to be questioned. But there's also a deeper history of organized crime and strong-arm tactics. So back in the 40s and the 30s, this was the places where the East Coast Mafia was looking for new markets. The Gambino crime family, families that were operating in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, they were going into these little towns in order to start new gambling businesses. And one by one, they would take down all the major institutions by corrupting all of the officials. And I think it's kind of grown into a culture now where certain people are protected, and the people who have bought the institutions and the officials, they stay in power and they reinforce their power with laws like this that effectively turn over all of the responsibility for justice onto the victims.
Well, man, I got to tell people they definitely need to check out your book, Blue Mafia. Tim Tolka, thank you for coming on and educating us a little bit about a part of the country that we don't talk about as much as we definitely should. Thank you so much today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The world's